Hello and welcome to the Kyiv Post weekly podcast. I'm your host, Rahim Rahemtulla, a staff journalist here at the Kyiv Post. In today's programme, we're going to be looking at the highlights from the March 17th edition of the newspaper. Now, this newspaper had a very strong theme to it, which was made in Ukraine. And so in today's podcast, we're going to be discussing three stories related to that theme. First, we're going to look at the question of Ukraine as a national brand. This is one of the stories on our front page. It was written by Olga Rudenko, an editor here at the Kyiv Post, and she joins me now. Olga, thanks for coming.
Thank you.
So tell us a little bit more about this idea of national brands. Where does Ukraine fit into this?
We started looking at Ukraine as a brand, and we came across this study, this annual report that a group called Brand Finance Agency. They do an annual ranking of what the brands of various nations are worth. It turned out that Ukraine did fairly well last year. So in the 2016 report, Ukraine actually it didn't do as well as some other countries, because in a list of 100 nations, Ukraine's brand ranked 59th. But at the same time, Ukraine was among top 5 nations that showed the biggest growth within 1 year.
What does this mean, this idea of national brands? So Ukraine is 59th.
Yeah.
What is that in the real world?
It's a good question, because apart from giving a nation a rank, like a place in this list, they also evaluate how much in terms of money the nation's brand is worth. So for Ukraine, it's $56 billion. It is kind of an abstract number, because what this agency does is they evaluate a large number of what they call pillars of the nation's brand, including like things like tourism, people and skills, investment and other things, security, like justice system. They give a score to each pillar, like something like between 1 and 100. For Ukraine, most of these pillars were scored as 40-something, 50-something, 60-something. So that's the range, yeah. And then they calculate the general score and put a nation at some place.
And this number, then, this table which emerges with the rankings, who's looking at this? Is this something principally for investors, for other governments? Is it for consumers? Maybe
it is. Yeah, I would think it is mostly for investors, just given the just looking at the things that they evaluate. I think investors are the ones who would be most interested in this. Interestingly, what was interesting for me personally is that even though, you would think that security is the biggest issue in the country right now, given that we have, war raging in the eastern region. But actually, security wasn't the lowest scored pillar in this ranking, while the most problematic thing in Ukraine is apparently our judicial system. This is the pillar that was got the lowest score in this ranking.
It's interesting what you wrote in your report with regards to the war in eastern Ukraine, and I think you had one analyst there who said the war had actually done more to promote Ukraine as a brand, that had actually raised awareness as a country, and in fact it had had a positive effect on Ukraine in the rankings, which is... In a way, yes, because it helped to raise awareness about what Ukraine is. It's not a secret if we say that, if 3 years ago, if you asked someone in Western Europe or in the US about Ukraine, some of the people would not be able to point Ukraine on a map. So I think as tragic as the events in Ukraine were and are, they are sort of raising awareness of Ukraine in the world, and at least that's what the analysts from this agency told me. At the same time, while the war helped raise awareness of what Ukraine is, it actually took Ukraine down in the ranking. So the growth that Ukraine had in this ranking last year, it reflects how Ukraine is regaining its positions. So Ukraine, so this would have been prior to, say, 2013, was actually higher in the rankings than it is now, something like that. But what then is the next steps? Does this ranking suggest recommendations? How do countries improve their national brand? Well,
it doesn't give recommendations. It's more like it's not for Ukraine. It's more, for investors and people who are interested in Ukraine. So they don't actually give any recommendations on how to improve it. But just looking at the things that they evaluate, it's not it's pretty obvious that the Ukraine has to fix its justice system and security issues. The pillar that ranked the highest when they evaluated Ukraine was Ukraine's people and skills, which is good because it means for investors it means that we have a highly educated workforce. But at the same time it means that we can be losing some of our people to the West and other countries who the people who just go and leave the country, and if we don't fix things like justice system and security and other issues.
So as ever, it's a story of Ukraine. Great potential, great people, great skills, but the system needs a bit of work.
Yeah, not a new story. Yeah.
All right. Well, Olga, thank you very much for coming. That's where we'll have to leave it on this one. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
We turn now to our second story, which also comes under the Made in Ukraine theme. This is about weapons in Ukraine. Will Ponomarenko, the journalist behind the story, joins me now. Will, thanks for coming.
Hi there. Thanks for inviting me.
So tell us about the weapons industry in Ukraine. Still a big export, although since the war with Russia began, the Russian market has closed to Ukraine. So where are the Ukrainian weapons going now?
By now, Russian market has been closed since 2014, but still we are 10th biggest weapons exporter in the world. The problem is Ukraine still exports a lot of weapons, but the problem is that most of the amount of the weapons is being sold without any workload for Ukrainian enterprises. For instance, many of old stocked Soviet era weapons, for instance, small weapons for like rifles or assault rifles, pistols, and machine guns are being sold to Africa, and without any workloads, we just selling out our Soviet legacy.
So these are not modified; they're not changed in any way.
Without any workload for Ukrainian plants, for instance. But there is still a significant amount of Ukrainian-made and Ukrainian-designed weapons sold outside Ukraine. And third article is old Soviet weapons or vehicles modified or repaired for Ukrainian enterprises. For instance, I would say that the top article of weapons being sold abroad is, for instance, the T-72 or T-64 tanks, modified and repaired at Ukrainian enterprises, for instance, in Kharkiv. And they are quite popular outside because they are much cheaper than, for instance, Russian modifications being sold abroad for exported versions. For instance, we sold as many as 50 T-64 tanks, Ukrainian modified, to Nigeria, and we gained some $10 million of it.
So you mentioned that Nigeria. Who are the top buyers now of Ukrainian?
By now, since Russia has been excluded of the market, our top importer of weapons is China. Chinese use these Ukrainian-made turbofans for its own jet fighters. K8.
Okay.
K8 jet fighters. So they prefer or purchasing Ukrainian turbofans for their own engines.
And for example, here then the Ukrainian they choose Ukraine. Is that because of the price or because of compatibility with their own equipment?
I would say it's the price, because Russians are making the same engines, the same turbofans in Russia and on their own enterprises, but the price is slightly higher. So Chinese are preferring to buy Ukrainian ones. But still, most of the imports to China, made by China, is not the exact amount of weapons or ready vehicles. It's just only details and units and parts of units for military vehicles. So this is the problem, that we are not producing the exact items, ready items.
So presumably for the Ukrainian weapons industry, what they would like to see is brand new weapons made, assembled, completely put together here in Ukraine and then shipped abroad. I mean, do we see that happening anywhere?
Yes, we see that happening, but it's not that big amount. For instance, we have the upload tanks main battle tanks, which I consider one of the best main battle tanks in the world. They're being sold to Thailand. And also, still we have good modifications of BTR-4 APCs, BTR-3 APCs, which are sold to Iraq, which are sold to Indonesia. But still, the problem is that Ukrainian industry by now it's not capable of making enough vehicles to be exported and to fulfill the whole amount of contract obligations. We have designs, we have lots of interesting weapons to propose to the world, but we are incapable of making enough to be considered as the good exporter. We cannot even fulfill our own obligation on our contract. For instance, the contract on providing these upload tanks for Thailand, it's been failed many times. It must have been fulfilled last year. It's now failed, and we don't know exactly when it's going to be fulfilled. But still, despite the fact that we are selling too much of the Soviet weapons, we are proposing the world, for instance, BTR-4s. It's APCs designed in 2000s and quietly popular. They are cheaper than any kinds of Russian, European APC armored personnel carriers.
Well, Will, it sounds like there's both bright spots and some work to do. Thanks very much for coming on the podcast to tell us about weapons in Ukraine.
My pleasure, thank you.
So we turn now to our third and final story for today, which also comes under the Made in Ukraine theme. This is written by Olena Goncharova and Anna Yakutenko. Olena joins me now to talk about it. Olena, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
So your story looks at how there's been a surge in both demand and supply, I think it's fair to say, of goods which have been made in Ukraine in the last few years. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, that's right. And in fact, we tried to trace back to 2013, right after the revolution, and look how that event and the start of the war and annexation of Crimea helped local producers to understand that now they have this market, and with all the economic situation, which was really tough, they have to produce goods for local citizens. They should be competitive with brands like, I don't know, Zara and Mango, which became really expensive for most of the people to buy, unfortunately, after the revolution.
So this is a response to the fact that Ukrainians want homegrown alternatives to international brands, which they can't afford anymore. But this is also about patriotism as well.
Yeah, that's right. So at the same time, everything was really difficult on both political and economic scene. It was a huge wave of patriotism, and so it became really popular, so to say, in vogue, to wear Ukrainian-made clothes, accessories, to buy any kinds of goods that are produced locally.
Is something going to grow out of this? Is this just a sort of temporary fashion, or did you see in your investigations some Ukrainian companies which have grown up because of this and which now will continue to grow and perhaps even export abroad, for example?
Well, we saw that many of those local producers and local brands now are ready to go into retail, and now we have a big store in central Kyiv which sells lots of clothes, shoes, accessories, toys, home supplies, and their owners say that those brands are really popular not only among Kyivans but also among tourists. But actually, in a couple of years, I guess there will be only maybe 10 or 15 brands strong enough to stay in this market and actually export their goods abroad, because, of course, the competitiveness of that market is pretty high and demanding, so they have to stick to those standards, I guess.
So, I mean, at the moment, then, is it fair to say that the made in Ukraine sort of craze, if you will, or the fashion has mostly been confined to Kyiv, or do you see that these brands are now branching out to other parts of the country?
Yeah, I can see that this trend actually reached the regions, especially some western Ukrainian cities such as Lviv and Ivano-Frankivsk, and there are many of producers who are working there as well. And of course, Eastern Ukraine, we are not talking about Donbass, but other cities also jumped in, and they are producing, for example, shoes like in Zaporizhia, and those are pretty good ones. At least that's what we were told by the owners of that store in Kyiv.
And finally then, and do you see are there any early signs of success stories, as it were, of these Ukrainian brands making it in Western Europe or abroad?
Well, definitely, because some of the producers already reached Western markets, and they are popular in, for example, different websites that sell socks or, dresses or sleepwear abroad. And Ukrainian goods are pretty good there, and so the producers see that they can do more in this area and just grow their quality and increase production so they can reach more consumers abroad.
Perfect. All right. Well, Elena, many thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, that's all we have time for today. If you'd like to read any of the stories that we've been discussing, do visit our website, www.kyivpost.com, or pick up a copy of the paper. Until next week, that's all from us here in Kyiv. Bye-bye.